Hello once again. This is a follow-up video to the last one I made regarding the checklist. And it could almost be called a love affair between me and my aluminum mistress right here. She and I have this thing going on. She treats me good, I treat her good. I buy her things. I've bought her an autopilot. I bought her a couple of alternators. I bought her lots of creams and oils over the years. I buy her drinks quite regularly right up here at the Foley FBO bar. And I'm going to tell you something. Drinks for this lady ain't cheap. We're talking like $5.80 a gallon. Now think about that. You may say, oh, Jay, a drink for a gallon for $5.80. She goes through drinks at a rate of about that. She'll go through that gallon in 8 minutes or so. So she's a pretty thirsty girl. But she has been faithful to me. She's never left me stranded. She's never led me to believe that she's not going to get me where I want to go. So that brings us to this part of the checklist right here that I want to go over. And this really started going around in my brain. I watched a video that was done by Flight Chops, and it's talking about that impossible turn. And that one was just put up by him a few weeks ago, and I thought it was a good video. And he talked about, you know, the final analysis, I think, in his plane, which is an RV. I think it was like 750 feet or so, something like that, before he could turn back. But around, I think it was 600 or so, they could turn away from populated areas and maybe make it to airport property. Well, that got me to thinking. Now, when I first started flying the plane, I did those kind of tests, and I think I came up with about 800 feet for a turn back. Anything lower, and you're looking for trouble. So that brings us up to the engine failure portion of this checklist. So let's have a look at that and talk about it. All right. As you pilots know, when your aluminum mistress takes you off the planet for a while, and you fly around and you come back and land, you feel like you've done something. For me, it kind of, it's like flushing an emotional toilet, if there is such a thing. And I do believe there is. I feel like a different person. And like I mentioned, the aluminum mistress has never betrayed me so far. But I've thought about it. If I take off and she begins to betray me by an engine power loss, engine sputtering, the center of gravity between the relationship of the aluminum mistress and me has shifted all to me. As soon as I'm betrayed that way, it's like a woman who's cheated. I care nothing else about the airplane. My goal has become self-preservation. So that brings us to this part of the checklist. You got all the engine run up, the before takeoff, and just before I taxi out and apply full power, I go through this. If the engine fails, the first thing you've got to do is unload the wings. You don't want to freeze up for a few seconds and let that airspeed continue to drop. You're going to get into a very dangerous situation if you do that. Unload the wings. And I think it was Dan Greider said you should feel light in the seat. You unload them so fast. For me, unload the wings, 80 knots. I want to pick a sight and commit. Now, why do I add the word commit? I saw a video once where a lady was flying, lost an engine. She picked a sight, she was heading for it, and then several seconds later, she saw another sight that was, maybe a 20 or 30 degree turn. Although she had already lost some altitude, she was heading for her primary sight. She said it took everything in her not to turn towards what she thought was a better sight. So that's why I say commit. You start trying to maneuver down low, and you're going to get in trouble. So unload the wings, 80 knots, pick a sight, and commit. And I used to have the pump mixture selector ignition thing right here. But I've changed it because when I take off, I'm going to have the pump on. The selector is going to be on the fullest tank. Mixture is going to be rich. And of course, the engine is going to be running. So if I lose power on takeoff, it's not likely going to be one of those other causes. It's going to be a fuel issue, either getting fuel there or water in the fuel, something like that. So to me, in order to bring the highest chance of saving the day, I don't think about pump. I don't think about mixture. My hand is on that stuff when I take off. So I know it's full forward. And if there's a problem with the mixture, it's not going to be anything I can do anything about. So the only thing I can really do anything about is change the fuel selector from the tank it's on to another tank in case for some reason there's water or whatever. Switch it to the other tank. The pump is already on. The mixture is already ready. So if it is water in the line, just by switching the tanks, it might solve the problem. As far as ignition, if the prop is stopped, of course, you're going to have to hit the ignition. If it's windmilling, hopefully you'll hear it crank up and you can fly out of it before you have to make a forced landing. If that doesn't work, if you got time, a couple of seconds, maybe squeeze off a mayday. Now, normally if I was at altitude, I would go through pump, mixture, selector, ignition, toggles, flaps, master, canopy. But if you're down low to the ground, I'm going to switch my selector back in between the two in the aft position with the handle, which will be in the off position. That way the fireball will be as small as possible. Flaps, when I get down low enough, I'm going to drop those flaps. Then I'm going to turn the master switch off. That's why I don't worry about turning the pump off or anything else electrical, because the master switch is going to kill everything. And just before I touch the ground, I'm going to undo the canopy so that it's just a latch over my head that keeps it closed. You don't want that thing to jam up and not be able to get out. And now, if you'll look down here to take off and climb. Now, I've gone through all this. Hopefully you won't need any of that. But look down here at take off and climb. Rotate at 60 knots. Then I got 90 knots in parentheses and 120 knots. I used to have 60 knots and 120 knots. I rotate at 60. We'll accelerate up to about 120 knots. And that's kind of a cruise climb. And I'm getting a pretty good rate of climb right there. But after watching the video with Flight Chops, I decided I'm going to change the way I take off. I rotate at 60. My best rate of climb is 90 knots. So if I can climb at 90 knots until I'm at about that magic 750, 800 feet altitude, when I'm probably could turn back at least to hit airport property, if not make the runway, I want to spend the least amount of time in that climb from takeoff to the 800 feet. And the way to do that, I've decided, was the best rate. Once I hit that, engine still running good, then I pitched forward a little bit and accelerate to 120 knot cruise climb. Anyway, I welcome your comments and thoughts down below and hope you found this thought-provoking and useful. See you next time.